discuss today how your perfect procurement process might be rejecting your perfect suppliers and what to do about it. So Charlie brings the strategic perspective from leading both Telos and SU UK. Jaime will share Zurich's groundbreaking approach to working with social enterprise, and Richard will challenge us with the tough questions nobody wants to answer. So let's dive in.
Miroslav, thank you very much. And look, welcome everyone. We're going to have a fun discussion. We're going to take about 25, 30 minutes, and then we're going to leave some time at the end for any questions. If you've got any, please pop them in the Q&A. Miroslav will be keeping an eye on things and making sure that we post them. But as per the introduction, we've got some two great panelists today, and perhaps, gentlemen, we could start with some introductions. So who are you, what do you do, and what's your relationship with the topic? Jaime, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Richard, and thank you everybody for making the time. Interesting to see also some former colleagues here. Claude, Satu, I saw you joining as well, so great to see you here. My name is Jaime Paiva. I live in Germany. I'm originally from Brazil, but been here now for 18 years or so, and I'm currently the head of Procurement Excellence for Zurich Insurance. And my relationship or my interest on the topic is really comes like over 8-9 years ago when we started doing this in Zurich in the beginning as a side activity, just to see where it would take us. And all of a sudden we realized how important this could be for the whole organization. And from there started progressing, improving, expanding. And it's something that makes me very proud of, not taking the credits myself, but there's a whole team behind me or next to me, making this one of activities that we do and is a differentiator today for us. Thank you, Richard.
Lovely, thank you. And Charlie, I mean, I think you've got a tenuous link to this topic, I think. So perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Richard, and hi everybody. Thank you for joining. So yeah, I'm not John Hanson. Apologies for all of you who are turning up expecting to see him. But no, I am the managing director of Telos, and as has been said, the deputy chief executive at Social Enterprise UK. I guess our interest in this topic stretches back, more than 10 years when we started Social Enterprise UK with a national body for social enterprises, and we were looking for ways to support the growth of the social enterprise sector. These are all businesses that trade for a social or environmental purpose. There's about 2.5 million of them across Europe, and our interest was really in how could we help them to engage with the markets where they're operating or seeking to grow. And we began working in the B2B space with large corporations, and set up something called the Bi-Social Corporate Challenge in the UK in 2016. And that has grown and developed beyond our kind of wildest expectations, really, both because of the incredible quality of suppliers that we've been able to work with and the social enterprises who are having incredible impact, but also kind of really growing and scaling in the B2B space. And also because of fabulous clients and buyers like Jaime who've worked with us to do that. We in the UK alone are approaching 700 million euros spent with social enterprises. We've created about 5,000 jobs through doing that, and that's led to the creation of Telos. So Telos is the global subsidiary of Social Enterprise UK. It exists to take the work that we've done or piloted in the UK and to expand that both across EMEA through the Bi-Social Europe programme, and also to work with partners around the world, like the World Economic Forum and so on developing how we can make more of these opportunities happen all over the world.
Got it. Look, Charlie, thank you. And I think you might have a natural bias to this, so I'm actually going to start the next question with Jaime. And Jaime, perhaps from your perspective and the work that you've done, perhaps you'd just like to share with our audience, what is a social enterprise, and why would a business want to work with them?
Sure. So I know that I will be missing something here in the technical definitions of a social enterprise, but to make it, I think that easy for everyone, we see a social enterprise as another potential supplier to us. And that means that predominantly they are profit oriented, that they can and should be competing on equal terms on the commercial aspect of it, on the technical or quality aspect of it. But then the differentiator that we see in the social enterprise is the value that they add.
Right.
Because for those of you who work in procurement roles, when we run a tender, an RFX or whatever, usually you start by comparing the cost, the quality, the service, even some of the requirements that how well do they meet. But usually you miss then the point about potential value that a supplier would bring with a contract. And this is what we have seen in the past, as I mentioned at the beginning, 8, 9 years, perhaps even more, working with social enterprise, is that they don't only compete on equal terms on the traditional criteria, but then they bring this value add on top of it. And this is where you see very often we're looking into this and saying, well, but hold on, it's not really apples to apples, because they do all of this, but they bring this in addition. So, Charlie, I know that I probably missed several aspects, but for us is just another potential supplier that will need to compete in equal terms with the other mainstream suppliers. But on top of it, they will have this social mission or environmental mission that at the end of the day can play a significant role when we are evaluating and comparing all of them, because of that additional value that they will bring.
Yeah, interesting point. And Charlie, I'm interested in how you pick up on this, because I think that positioning of, look, they're just another supplier, but there is something about them that makes us call them out as a social enterprise. You know, with your experience, what would you add to sort of Jaime's description of that something else that they bring to complete the picture of, you know, what we're talking about? What is a social enterprise?
Yeah, so I think there are two sides to this, right? I think one is when we talk about this from purely a social enterprise perspective, what we're talking about is businesses that exist for primarily for a social and environmental purpose. And what that means is that they have a governance structure, so more than just a mission statement, or it says on the website something or other, that dictates that they are a business and they're trading as a business, as Jaime said, but they're seeking to do that in order to deliver a social and environmental mission. And that could be achieved through who they employ, that could be achieved through where their profits go, that could be achieved through how they're structured or partnered with other non-profits, for example. But that is a structural difference from a small or medium-sized business or a kind of purposeful enterprise that might exist, because it is written into how that organization is set up.
Right.
And I think to link that back to the kind of buyer side, to what Jaime was talking about there, what we would talk about, I guess, is when you're looking at corporate procurement, there are what we would term as kind of hygiene factors around suppliers. So beyond quality and price, that have always been, since the ARC, the things that matter, there are increasing number of hygiene factors that might relate to socioeconomic factors. So around carbon footprint, around modern slavery, around all of these things that every supplier, if you want to be able to play, if you want to bid for a contract, you have to have these, or you aren't coming in. And they apply just as much to social enterprises, as Jaime said, as they do to anyone else. What's different, I think, from a corporate perspective is that social enterprises are bringing something that the corporate isn't asking for above and beyond that. So yes, they've got to do the hygiene piece, they've got to do the basics and bring that, but they're also employing people with autism, or they're also delivering microfinance in Africa, or they're also doing, you know, they're delivering these incredible narrative stories and impact that would never be part of an RFP.
Yeah.
But are going way beyond the kind of the hygiene factors that are kind of the minimum base requirements from a corporate expectation perspective.
All right. Well, let's flip it then, because this sounds great. We're talking about suppliers, nothing special. They supply the same products and services as their competitors. They operate effectively, but they also have an additional mission. So I'm ex-military. So, let's imagine that we've got a IT provider that has embedded in its core value that it's going to provide opportunities for veterans, particularly veterans maybe that have suffered injury through conflict, and there is a specific point. So they're a social enterprise. They do a good thing. They look after an important part of the community, but they also do a great job of delivering IT services or whatever it is they do. So the obvious question is, this sounds great, so why isn't it happening? Because you would have thought that if I had the opportunity to get the products and services that I needed for my business, and I could see that here was a company that could do it, which also had this extra social value, surely I would be leaping at the chance. But we're here because it isn't. So Jamie, you've lived this, and we'll come later to how you solve that problem. But Jamie, what from a purely commercial, from a perspective of that commercial perspective, from big indirect spend, why don't businesses jump at the chance to use these kind of suppliers? What is it that gets in the way?
It's a good question, and it might require a very long answer. Let me try. I will start with the external side and then move into, I think, the procurement function.
Okay.
One of the reasons is that these companies are typically very small in size.
Right.
Yeah. So it would fall under the SME topology of suppliers. That also means that they don't have time to spend with customer acquisition. They don't usually go to trade fairs, so it starts with that. The second thing is that it's difficult to find them. So that's why we work with organizations like Telos or SE UK, because they manage a directory of these companies. And when we have a need, we can go to them and say, well, I'm running this tender on security services. Do you have anyone that would be available or could work for us in Bristol, for example? So these are only two perhaps external. Internally, I think it is difficult for many companies to try, and I can speak for myself, my experience. When you work with a large supplier that can help you in many different sites, in many different countries, and you are discussing with the business about this very small company, the business side, usually they see or they think, why would I take that risk? I have this company that we have been working on with for several years.
Yeah.
I get, and I will be provocative now, I get this thing about the social impact, but I have my relationship, I have my service that I have to deliver to the company. Why would I take the risk? So this is starting at outside, ending inside. One other thing that I'm pretty sure that we can explore a little bit more in details later is category management.
Right.
We have been over decades educated on a school of thought of category management that you should optimize KU, you should bundle suppliers, you should globalize your supply base. Those are things that make engaging and developing a social enterprise to work for one office or a country very difficult, because they don't meet those requirements. So one thing that we should revisit is what is the strategy? Is my category management strategy or is my social impact strategy? And how do you work with both?
Okay, let's hold that thought, because I think that's a really good point, and it comes down to, I suppose, the inbuilt culture of an organization in the way that it's been trained to operate. But I just wanted to throw this across to Charlie, because Charlie, obviously, look, you talk to a lot of social enterprises who, you know, are members of Social Enterprise UK or increasingly Telos. I mean, you know, briefly, what are they telling you is stopping them winning business with, you know, larger in fact, any organization, but particularly larger organizations? I mean, what would you add to that list of the barriers that you're hearing from social enterprises?
Yeah, I think Jaime's covered the main areas very well, and I think they'd be very much the same from a supplier perspective. I think there's a lot in that big v small thing of, you know, you have very large, very complex global organizations, and then you have a supplier looking to enter their supply chain. There are challenges around, you know, navigation there. You know, who do I speak to? Who is the person that manages our category or area of work within that business? How do I find them? Quite often, and for very good reasons, you know, procurement people don't want to be found too much because they just get bombarded by by suppliers, you know. So there is a kind of, how do I get to the right person or the right people that can champion what we want to do? There is the challenge around incumbency again that Jaime mentioned, and you know, the safe option is always to stick with what you've got unless there's a kind of clear burning platform to move away from that. And I think, as you go through that process again of big v small, you know, the complexities around barriers to entry, onboarding, requirements that might be based on very, very large contracts being applied to very small ones, you know, the lack of proportionality around some of that risk and process. And there's a whole lot in that category management approach that we could come on to, but I won't start on that now because I know you want to do that later. But yeah, I think a lot of the same things, I would say, just from the other perspective.
Right. Well, look, I'm just going to bounce this back then to Jaime. So, look, I've been a chief procurement officer. We invest a lot of time in making sure that, you know, we focus on operating well and operating compliantly and those good things. But, you know, there was a great question that came in prior to the meeting from Anna, which I actually think partly comes to this category management point, but it's this. The focus in organizations was, and I suspect always will be, around cost. And, you know, there's a broader view, and many are pushing it, that value is much broader than cost. But I just welcome your view as to whether in those organizations that are purely cost focused, that makes it difficult for a social enterprise to even enter the playing field, because that's not really what they're bringing to the party. They're bringing broader value. So do you think that perhaps an overemphasized focus on cost and cost reduction is itself a barrier to social enterprises?
Yes, it is.
Right.
The short answer is it is. And the solution is, how do you counterbalance that? Yeah. So I mentioned at the beginning the social mission, the social value.
Yep.
For those of you who like to read out more in-depth papers or research, there is one document that I would definitely recommend you. It's a little bit dated, perhaps, or not dated, but it's 4 or 5 years old. The Social Procurement Manual. It was published by Yunus Social Business together with BCG. And they show in numbers, so based on a survey that they ran at that time, what are those differentiators? And what they see there, and what we then have experienced to a certain extent in higher or lower degrees, but is the impact, the positive impact on your talent strategy, your engagement with the employees, how it's easier for you to go to market and make your company more attractive to new talent by showing what you do for society, for the community that you're present. And we have people that join us 21, 22 during the COVID period that told us after it started with us that they said, well, one of the decisions that I decided to join Zurich was because I read about all of your sustainability programs, including the social procurement part. But then it's how also many companies, not ours, I think, but how many companies can associate their brand strategy with the social impact. So the study is quite extensive. I would definitely recommend you to go there. What we have seen also, and I will end up with this, is that usually the attention that you get from the social enterprise, the customer team that will be working with you is the so-called A team. It's not, a rep or someone that will probably have time for you on Friday afternoon. They will put the best people that they have. Very often is the founder, is the CEO or something similar to work with you. And that makes over time a significant difference.
Do you know what? I think this is a really key part of what we're going to move on to next, which is right. There's clearly a problem, and there therefore needs to be a solution. And if I may, I'm gonna characterize the problem that we've heard. Imagine you're running a procurement function for an organization that is cost focused, not wider value focused. And by wider value, I mean just as much environmental targets as I mean social targets. You have processes and technology that there has been a big investment in that are designed to minimize risk. So supplier due diligence checks, past accounts, making sure that anybody that's participating in an RFP is considered a low risk provider. We've then got the sourcing process off the back of a category strategy. And, that category strategy points at going to market. Incumbents and suppliers that operate at scale have an advantage over small players that have neither the scale nor the trading history with the business. So we hit a perfect storm of a social enterprise not being able to talk to the business because the language is different, value is meeting cost. Secondly, they're struggling with the supplier due diligence and onboarding requirements because they don't have that kind of paperwork, the history, the resources. And if that organization is focused on cost, again, they're going to struggle because that's not necessarily what they're competing on. They're competing on broader value. And, we've seen, a great observation from Yasmin in the chat that it's really hard to break into a company if your procurement team is not open to having a conversation despite all of those challenges. So that's where we are. So the question is, out there amongst social enterprises are some truly brilliant companies. They can do everything that we need them to do, product or service. They may not be the most competitive on cost, but they are often local and they're pursuing a broader social mission, which means they should be valued and should be considered. So, Jaime, if you may, I'm going to come straight back to you because you've lived this journey. What is it that businesses need to do to unlock those process barriers, those cultural barriers, and that attitude to value? And you've hinted at it a bit already. It starts with leadership and direction from the board. But I'd love to know, and I know it's a big question, I'd love to know how you start to remove those barriers so that we can access that brilliance.
First off, it is good for procurement. Yeah, it's a way to move the conversation that we usually have away from the cost and the delivery time and the risk and the regulation that you have.
Yeah.
It's something that, and Charlie, I know that MSC UK also have some data on this. Those procurement organizations that have their own social procurement programs, they see a shift in the type of discussion, the conversation that they have in their companies. It helps raising the awareness of the procurement function. It helps procurement to have more strategic discussions as well. It's almost like building more credibility, more reputation, and then unlocking other things for the function overall. Now, the other aspect of my answer, Richard, when I was talking about the category management part of it, I think that in our experience, what we do is, even before the category strategy, when we are doing the segmentation of the suppliers, of the services, of the commodities that we buy, we try to identify those that are typically low value or low risk, or where you could experiment, because we started with office supplies, which is a perfect example. If it fails, yes, we will not stop the operations. So it's one area that you are allowed to try. Don't try it with, I don't know, a BPO or your data center, because the consequences might be significant. So find where you can start. Depending on your industry, this might be different as well. But then when you identify those areas and you start thinking about the strategy, I think that the shift in our thinking is really that the social impact needs to be the strategy. How can you use your spend to deliver social impact? It's not how can you buy less or buy cheaper, for something else. And if you manage to separate these two objectives very clearly, then you will accept that in some cases you have to handhold. You have to help the supplier going through your contract template. It might have 20 or more pages, because they might even not succeed the first time, but they will be learning from the process. The next time, they will perform better. So it's an investment. Again, you have the strategy backing you up. You want to use your spend to deliver social value or a positive impact. And then over time, that same supplier that might not win a contract today, in 6 months or in 12 months when you have to renew, they will be better prepared. So that's what we try to do. Sometimes it is easier than others, but that's what we try to do.
Well, do you know what I love? And obviously, one of our viewers, Nathan, is running an office supply business, so this will be music to his ears. But I think there's a really important message there, which is start small in areas that are low risk, non-threatening to the business, and I think that's a really good insight, because we all know, if you're nervous about something, a small step that builds confidence is going to help. Charlie, if I may, I want to come across to you, because obviously you've spent a lot of time lobbying and talking to large organizations, global organizations, about the benefits of engaging with social enterprise. And I'm sure you will have heard many pushbacks or reservations from large companies as to why, they like the idea, but they're not taking the step. What would you say is the top one or two things that you've heard and from large organizations about unlocking this problem? What helps them?
So I think that we've covered some of the barriers already. I think cost pressures, other complexities, other priorities, be they geopolitical, the poly crisis, all of this stuff, that's on the desk of chief procurement officers, and it can feel like this is another thing that they could do without in the context of all of that. I think that for me, the most important thing, and in the organizations that are doing this well, is leadership. And I think leadership from within procurement, people like Jaime and the other, senior procurement people that we work with, because, to go back to what Jaime was mentioning before, when you have you might have an overall, a big savings target for the year or other things. There's always going to be those things out there within the procurement function. Is there the leadership within that function to say that, look, on this particular opportunity in this area, we don't need to save 20%. We don't need to, because those savings are going to come from your big contracts, the real savings, and so, how do we have give the license to colleagues to say, you need to be able to think about value as well as deliver on these things. It's not an either or, it can be an and. And I think sometimes there's a very binary view of, we have to be driving this across everything, and not, let's look at this from a broader value perspective. This is, relatively speaking, a small contract. By the way, that small contract could be a massively valuable contract for that social enterprise, but from a procurement perspective, that's a small contract. It's not going to cost a load more. It's going to be and in terms of statistics that Jaime mentioned earlier, on over 700 million euros of spend in the UK, 90% of that has been cheaper or the same on price. So we're not talking about things suddenly being wildly more expensive. Social enterprises have to be competitive because they're operating in a market.
Yeah, they are.
But if there is that driver of, we've got to get 20% savings year on year, and we're just going to blanket that across every single RFP, there's a potential misalignment there in terms of the broader value. And so I think that, leadership, license, culture, those areas of it that are maybe softer than kind of the process or the priorities also come into it and play to the broader strategic environment that CPOs are operating in, and there are signs that globalized category management approach is creaking in certain areas, and people are talking more about onshoring, and people are talking more about resilience and about local supply chains because of carbon and all of those things. And so the pendulum is shifting a bit, and I think it's about, how do you have a procurement function that can push you that.
Well, and I think this is a great point. And actually, just at the end there, I think you actually highlighted a really good parallel. Okay, so if we think about CO2, every organization that I work with has got a reduced CO2 by X% by some random date in the next 15 years. And I can tell you, because I work with thousands of category managers, that decisions on procurement are still mostly being driven by cost. The impact on the company's CO2 target by most organizations is not being taken into account. In fact, the information isn't even being presented to a decision maker. And what you often hear is it's too far around the corner. It's a 2030 or a 2035 deadline. But we know that those companies that are taking the lead are actively shortening their supply chains, partly to reduce risk, but also because they've realized that there is a CO2 contribution to their target, a reduction, by bringing things closer to shore. And actually, there's a similar thing with social enterprises. These are organizations which by any definition are compliant with human rights law. There are no issues about modern slavery or with of any kind. And we know that, longer globalized supply chains, that risk exists. So it strikes me there's a win-win, but this throws a problem. And I'm going to throw this slight curveball at Jaime because it's come up in the chat. Measuring cost is easy. Measuring CO2 in principle is easy, but it's difficult to get the data. But Jaime, what is the measure of social value? How do you measure it?
I wish there would be one answer for this one. In our experience, we couldn't find it yet. And simply because the social or environmental mission can be presented in so many different ways. It can be by providing employment opportunities to the veterans. Yep. It can be that the food that is served in the canteen comes from a radius of, 50 kilometers instead of, importing from South America. It can be many different things. So if we would try to create a report, it would be so demanding. It would be so difficult for us that we didn't try to do it. What we did was we initially started with the spend, which is for procurement, the basic one, really. So how much do we spend with social enterprise? How many social enterprise we have in our supply base? But then we started getting reports from some of these enterprises about the impact. So there is a clear proxy. Again, Charlie, kudos to Social Enterprise UK, because you know that out of the spend through the Buy Social Corporate Challenge, how much of that spend has been reinvested? And this is the one that we are using now. So it's not my total spend, or it is the spend, but the real thing is of the spend that I did generate with the social enterprise, how much of it was reinvested? It was the profit that was reinvested in the social mission. And this is the closest that we could get until now.
Okay, so I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure we've got enough time to deal with any particular questions, but also practically how do we fix the problem? So what have we learned? We've learned what a social enterprise is. We understand that they're just another supplier, but they bring additional value. We've seen that there are process, technology, due diligence, cultural, maybe even training issues that have been brought into organizations that get in the way. But we've also heard there are ways of unlocking it. We can understand the value, we can understand what it brings, we can see the benefits. So, Jaime, I'm going to come to you first, and then Charlie second. And what I'm looking for is if someone on this webinar wanted to go back to their organisation and do something to start unlocking this challenge and getting that wider benefit, what would be your advice to them that they should go and do? Where should they start, Jaime?
A couple of things. What we discussed already. Start small. Find one area that you can experiment. If you succeed, great. Then you can build on that. If not, you can move on to the next attempt. The second is find allies in your organization. Find that social business, or the business partner that will be brave, perhaps, to change the incumbent.
Right.
You need that type of ally in the organization.
Love it.
From there, when you have your first success, communicate. And by that, I don't mean only communicate to management, but communicate to the rest of the staff, to all of the employees, because you see that if you put this on your internal social media, whatever channel you use, that will resonate with a lot of them, and that will create perhaps a more bottom-up demand, expectation that more of that should be made across the organization. So then you have your burning platform, if you want.
Like a grassroots momentum for change.
Correct.
Right. That's a lovely idea. And Charlie, obviously, you provide a wealth of resources and advice to organisations that are looking to make this change. But what would be your biggest piece of advice to an organisation really wanting to make a complete change to the way that they go about this?
So I think from Jaime's covered from a kind of practical perspective, around, start small and so on, and connect with us. I think obviously, speak to Telos, to Social Enterprise UK, to understand what's possible and what's out there. I think the other thing that I'd add is, which links to kind of finding internal advocates, but it is around find the hook, right, that's going to land this. I mean, I often think of, we've talked about the multiple different impact areas that social enterprises have, and that sometimes that can feel quite hard to pin down. It can feel a bit generic or kind of amorphous and kind of hard to say. It's just lots and lots of impact in lots of different ways. Find the thing that is really going to resonate with, executive strategy or with internal stakeholders or with the personal experience of your leadership or anything like that, so that could be, we had an example with one of our suppliers who are a life sciences business, big priority around mental health.
Right.
And they did a very small contract with a software testing business that works with people with autism. It was a pilot study. It was a tiny amount of spend, but it generated massive, interest internally. It had the CEO blogging about it and talking about it in a way that the procurement team would never get mentioned for a 5-figure piece of work, right? And that's just a way of building attention and resonance and be like, oh wow, this is actually something that can really drive a different, can hit places that other things can't really from a procurement perspective, but beyond, we saved 1% on this contract when we did it. And so I think there are social enterprises that have all of those hooks, all of that resonance, that kind of emotive side to things, or that kind of strategic alignment. And I think where you find that, there's something to really kind of drive at and push at that can really take things forward.
Got it. I'm going to offer one thought again, just from my experience, is be careful that I would go and check my technology, and process and technology are pretty synonymous now. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you are using technology to run a sourcing process, you may find that in your technology there are rules built into it that actively prevent social enterprises taking part in that process. And the simplest example is 3 years worth of accounts, or you've got to have a certain level of revenue, or you've got to have so many customers. So check that your technology is not actually preventing you from accessing. And Jamie, I'm going to call you out a little bit, because obviously I love what you've done. You told me once that one of the biggest things that you pushed was actually changing your decision making when you were looking at the results from RFPs. And it if I remember rightly, you said it comes down to, if a social enterprise can do it and it's passed all the tests, then we should just give them the business. The default should be, first question, has this passed the test? Can it supply the products or services? If it's a social enterprise, let's get it on board. I mean, do you think that kind of fundamental culture makes a big difference in the way that you engage?
Yes. And you mentioned culture. I would also mention maturity, because we achieved that level. It wasn't in the beginning. Yeah, it requires a lot of work so that your organization can have that understanding. Yeah, so nobody will question what is a social enterprise anymore.
Yeah.
But what I would suggest, and perhaps this could help those that are starting or want to start, is when defining on the selection criteria and the weighting. Yeah. So you have the commercial part, you have the risk, you have the quality, you have your technical requirements whatsoever. Agree with the business on putting 10%, 15% on social impact, because this is where then you can start scoring. Hopefully the social enterprise will score very high, and the traditional ones, they will not score at all. So you start capturing the value in the process.
Perfect. What a great thought to end. Charlie, Jamie, thank you so much for sharing both your experience and your ideas on how to develop it. Sadly, we're at the end of time. But for those that are watching, if you've got questions, please just reach out to Miroslav or Telos. We will come back to you with answers. And for those, Nathan, Yasmin, and others, great questions from the perspective of social enterprise. There are companies out there who want to work with you. Don't give up. Reach out for help from Telos, and maybe we can help deal it for you. But on that note, Miroslav, I hand it back to you to close.
Thank you, Richard. And I just want to say how amazing discussion and a great point you have been able to touch on So thanks, Richard. Thank you very much, Charlie, for stepping in, of course. And Jaime, of course, as always, thank you very much as well. Just the information for everybody. We have recorded the session, and we will share these recordings with all of you who have registered for our session today. And we plan also another sessions, perhaps at the latest period in January. So we invite you also to join us there and discuss with us other similar topic related to social enterprises and social procurement. Thank you very much for joining.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.